When I met my wife, she seemed perfect. We were in love and happy. But as time passed, I noticed that she was hanging out with her male friends more and more, and I began to suspect that she was hiding something from me. She wanted to be in a relationship with 2 guys at once and was lying to me about leaving for work, when in fact she was dating them. I began planning my revenge. I decided that I would not leave my wife unpunished for what she had done. And when I finally came up with my plan, I put it into action. Diane and Alexei had been married for 2 years. Diane was 26 and her husband was already in his 40s. The young woman was attracted to Alexei in the first place by his status and wealth. He had several businesses that brought him very good money, although at first glance you would not think that of Alexei. He dressed modestly, he himself looked plain, and under other circumstances, Diana would not even pay attention to such a man. She, who had worked as a model for only a couple of years and was used to a certain standard of living, chose for herself only what she thought suited her level. So when Alexei approached her in a cafe, where Diana went for a drink for a short while, the girl did not even hold her gaze on him and refused to get acquainted. But then, seeing what an expensive car he was getting into, she herself called out to Lesha. After the wedding, her husband forbade Diana to work as a model. She didn't mind. He fully provided for her, and never to work, and still live a chummy life she had always wanted. Looking at their couple, it was immediately clear that such a beauty herself would never have fallen in love with this man. There was nothing flashy about his head. Baldness was already coming in. Going out with him, somewhere together in the world Diana was not very fond of, so most often met with girlfriends in restaurants and spas. That's how her leisure time passed. Anton met her in one such restaurant. He did not even suspect that this beautiful girl was single. Diana always took the ring off her ring finger when she went out to meet her friends or just to go somewhere alone from home. When Diana looked up at Anton approaching her, she liked him immediately. He was young, incredibly handsome in person, and his figure just screamed that he loved sports and spent a lot of time on it. Anton looked stunning compared to her husband. He sat down with her, they got to know each other, and a conversation ensued. Diane, without any sense of doubt or feeling anything wrong, left her phone number with the man she liked. From that day on, her affair began. The endless correspondence and phone calls with Anton turned into romantic dates, which gradually became intimate. They met at his house or a hotel. Diana, to the man's surprise, tried never to stay overnight, saying that she felt more comfortable sleeping at home. And even then, Anton never suspected that she had a husband. Once, when her husband finally went out of town for a long time for work, she arranged that she too would go on a short vacation with her girlfriends. Diane herself, of course, went to the resort with Anton, where she spent a really nice weekend. Diana perfectly hid her secret relationship from her husband. She lied very convincingly and kept all the conditions in her head under which it was almost impossible to suspect her. She was comfortably ensconced. Alexei provided her a beautiful life, and Anton she left, so to speak, for the soul. She did not expect, and did not want anything serious from a relationship with her lover, because for her it was just another entertainment. But things were different for Anton himself. After 4 months of frequent meetings and dates, he began to realize that he was falling in love, and that this relationship, which began so easily and casually, was becoming more serious to him. One day after another intimacy, when they were lying on the bed in his apartment, he emotionally took Diane's hand and said, "Come on, move in with me already." At that moment, the woman froze and blinked frequently, continuing to stare at the ceiling. No joy could be read on her face at all from such an offer. In fact, deep down, she was even disappointed. "I'll think about it," she answered with a strained smile after a long silence. He should have ruined everything for him, she thought. She didn't want anything serious with her lover. She was only interested in having fun, and with this proposal, he put their relationship in question. From that day on, she began to answer his message less and less frequently. When he called, she didn't pick up at all. She dropped the call and wrote that she was very busy. For a while, Anton put it down to various reasons, whether it was his sweetheart's bad mood or really busy. But one day, when he had already openly asked her what was going on, she wrote him that she no longer wanted to continue the relationship. After that message, he didn't even have time to ask anything. Diane blocked him. Of course, he was unhappy that their relationship was ending so abruptly. But more importantly, he didn't understand why it happened. Everything was going well after all. They were enjoying each other, they were comfortable and happy together. But as soon as he mentioned something more, Diana was long gone. For the next few weeks, Anton could not get the situation out of his head. The relationship that he had invested so much time and energy in had abruptly ended. One day, he met up with an old friend of his from high school. They hadn't seen Sasha for months, as Anton spent all his free time with Diana. "Can you imagine? She left me like a puppy," proclaimed Anton from the beer and averting a gloomy look. Sasha looked at his friend and did not dare to say what was on his tongue. The thing is that he worked in a bank, and just the other day one of their big clients came to them not alone, as usual, but with his wife. He had already seen Diane in photographs, so he immediately recognized her in this visitor. "Listen," Sasha began and told him about Diana's deception and the fact that in fact she was married. After this story, Anton sat there like a drowned in water. And like a fool, he didn't notice anything. "Can you get her husband's phone number?" Suddenly, he said very seriously. "What? But it's really against our internal rules." Sasha hesitated. "Please," said Anton, and then his friend just nodded silently. The deceived man wanted revenge on Diana for something that arranged such a cruel game with his feelings, while still deceiving his own spouse. Anton decided to call Alexei and tell them everything, but several times his call was dropped. Then he wrote a text message, which revealed all the facts proving cheating on Diana, and with a sense of accomplishment, he finally distracted himself from his business. But Anton did not foresee one thing. That evening her husband's phone was in the hands of Diane herself, and she was the first to read these messages. Alexei had nothing to hide. The phone was always lying in a prominent place at home. While her husband was away, Diane quickly cleaned up, deleted all the text messages and blocked Anton, so he could not contact her husband again. Another month passed. Anton was in full confidence that the unfaithful wife had already been shamefully kicked out of the house, thus receiving a just punishment. So he himself had time to calm down internally, but fate presented him with an interesting encounter. After work and a successfully concluded deal, he decided to have dinner at his favorite restaurant. What was his surprise when in this very institution he saw his former lover, and not alone, but with her husband. Anton just exploded. Deep down, he had not forgiven Diane and wanted revenge on her. He walked over to the couple's table, took a chair from a nearby table, and unceremoniously sat down next to her. "What do you want?" asked a surprised Alexei. "My name is Anton. Didn't you read my message about your spouse?" smiled the lover. "Security," shouted Diana, pale with fear. "Call security." "What other message are you who?" The worried husband did not understand. "I'll show you," replied Anton and pulled out his phone. Before the guards arrived, he had time to tell and show Alexei everything he wanted. Joint photos, correspondence, the tickets he bought them, the two of them, for the trip. You could tell by the look on Alexei's face that he was seeing all this for the first time. "She cheated on you for almost 6 months. I didn't even know she was married. I hope you will act like a reasonable person," Anton said as he got up from the table and headed for the exit. As parting, he smiled slyly at Diana, who sat neither dead nor alive. As was to be expected, Alexei, after such convincing evidence, did not believe his wife's excuses. The divorce followed immediately. In an instant, Diana lost her beautiful house, limitless amounts of money, and the usual life of a comfortable life. Of course, Some amount she was able to win back, but with her habit of living large, that money was not enough for a long time. Some time after a divorce, the woman tried to get back to a modeling career, but she got the hint that she was no longer attracted to the big catwalks. After that, she had to look for a regular job, but her goals for the rich life of Diana did not leave the old to meet promising men. A couple of times, she even fell for the tricks of swindlers who only pretended to be rich and successful. However, fate had many more surprises in store for her so that she would learn her life lessons in full. Second story. I had always been sure I had a wonderful family. I trusted my wife and never suspected that she was capable of cheating. But one day when I saw my boss starting to get too involved with my wife, I began to suspect that something was wrong. I never would have thought that my wife was capable of cheating on me, but soon I began to notice a strange change in her behavior. She became too interested in her work, she had new interests and activities, and she paid less and less attention to me. I began to suspect that she was cheating on me, but I could not even imagine that my boss could become her lover. However, my fears proved correct. I had to get revenge for the cheating. I began to devise a plan of revenge to finally regain my honor and dignity. Lyosha and Masha had been married for 8 years. Their marriage, as Alexei said, was held together by silly jokes and teenage crushes. When he was 30 and his wife just turned 27, they had a son. More recently, the baby was 3 years old and he went to kindergarten, and Maria finally went to work. During her absence, some things changed in the company, including the director. The woman was meeting him for the first time and was surprised at what a wonderful man he was. The man's name was Pyotr Alexeyevich, and he was almost 10 years older than Maria. She, just out of maternity leave, hungry for communication with people and for men's attention, was flattered by the fact that her boss was obviously flirting with her. Masha flirted with him, trying not to break boundaries, but it was obvious that Pyotr Alexeyevich did not mind coming to something more. The flirting did not last more than a month. One day, the boss summoned Maria to his office, closed the door from the inside, and executed the plan. The woman was not at all against it, though she showed her refusal to be touched. After what happened, every time she saw her boss, Maria's cheeks lit up with embarrassment. She hid her eyes and mumbled during her dialogues with Peter. He was surprisingly strict with her, though as soon as he had a chance to pinch or lightly slap her buttocks, he did it. One day, after work, when everyone had left the office, the two lovers were sitting in the office. Peter was smoking by the window, and Maria was getting dressed. "Don't be offended that I talked to you so rudely in front of everyone," he suddenly said. As Masha was buttoning her blouse, she grinned. "Yeah, I figured as much, conspirator. Gotta get ready. I promised my wife I'd get through on time." The man put out his cigarette and closed the window. Even though she herself had a husband and child waiting for her at home, Peter's words about his wife hurt her. She pressed her lips together and silently continued packing. Frequent delays at work had taken their toll. Lyosha, who had never been jealous of his beloved, suddenly became nervous. He kept asking why Maria was late, because this had never happened before. Spouse could call several times a day to ask his wife what she was doing at work. The woman was angry at the sudden control that came over her. "Don't call me so much," she hissed into his phone when Alexei once again decided to make sure his spouse was really at work. "You're embarrassing me." "I'm just worried," her husband shouted to her. "You'd watch your son like that," Maria retorted. Usually an irritated Masha would hang up after that and grumble to herself for a long time more about how unhappy she was with Lyosha's behavior. Several times she began to sob at work when, after a quarrel with her husband, Pyotr Alexeyevich suddenly decided to give her a scolding in front of his colleagues. The woman was choking on tears of resentment, sitting in the toilet and carrying employees felt sorry for her, not suspecting that she herself had made the whole mess. On one such day, Peter asked Maria to stay late after work to finish her reports. But she was so offended by what he said in the afternoon that she suddenly refused to do it. The situation was weighing on her. Fighting with her husband, being humiliated by her boss in front of everyone, she was tired of it. She wanted to break the vicious cycle that was bringing her more misery than pleasure. Hearing her refusal, Peter was surprised. He stepped so close to her that only Masha could hear what he said and whispered, "You have no right to refuse. And what will you do to me?" Angry tears froze in her eyes. She looked at her boss with challenge, ready to defend her position to the end, but what she heard made the ground fall out from under her feet. "What am I going to do? I'll tell your husband all the details of what happened. And for him to believe it, I will tell him about Radinka in a special place." Peter spoke angrily, but calmly. He was sure of himself and his actions. This argument was stronger than any other that Maria could say to him in response. "Tonight you will stay," he repeated in a louder voice. Peter Alexeyevich left, and a pale Maria remained standing with her mouth open, grabbing the edge of the table to keep from falling. Her lover's words pulsed in her ears, keeping her awake. A mask of horror froze on her face. Masha somehow waited until the door closed behind the last of her colleagues. When she finally pulled herself together and got up from the table, her phone rang. Her husband's name was on the screen. The situation couldn't have been stupider. The woman decided not to answer. In half an hour, she would call him back and lie that she had left the phone lying in her bag and had not heard him. Pyotr Alexeyevich was already waiting for her at his place. Suddenly, the rose-colored glasses fell from Maria's eyes. The man no longer seemed as attractive as before. Now she saw before her not the man beside whom passion and desire warmed her. Now in front of her sat a pompous, narcissistic creep who thought of threatening her. Peter was smiling contentedly. He was like a cunning fox who had lured his next victim into his trap. "What a clever girl," he said, making the right choice. "Aren't you afraid I'll tell your wife everything?" Masha said in a trembling voice. The man laughed. "Do you think she doesn't know? She's fine with everything. Money, you know, it turns a blind eye to many problems." Maria had nothing to say. Her attempt to threaten her lover the way he threatened her failed, and the woman didn't really expect it to work. At this point, she did not know that her phone was still ringing off the hook with her spouse, and Alexei himself was already halfway to the place where Masha worked. In his mind, Lyosha had already imagined the worst of it. He vividly saw how he now bursts into the office, finds his wife there with a man he did not know. He imagined everything to the smallest detail, and that made him even angrier. Alexei felt his wife was deceiving him. Once he noticed on her shoulder almost disappeared bruise, and Masha said that she rubbed it with a sports bag. The man didn't believe a word of it. He told the guard that he had come to get his wife and began to walk up. Each successive step was harder than the last. It was as if two heavy weights were hung on his legs and prevented him from reaching his destination. His heart was beating against his ribs as if it was about to jump out of his chest. Alexei tried to catch his breath before entering. For a few moments, he held on to the handle of the door, hesitating to press it. Finally, having controlled himself, he entered. The lights were on in the corridor and in several other offices. Lyosha looked over to where Maria's desk was. His wife wasn't at her desk, but her things were there and her phone was on the table. The man listened. The silence was broken by muffled slaps coming from the back office, where the door was not fully closed. He opened the door with a kick, sharply and without delay. The picture before him made his teeth grind against each other and his fists clench. On the table, in a pile of papers, sat Maria, with a man in a white shirt nestled between her legs. When he heard someone enter, he bounced away from Masha like a scalded man, at the same time trying to pull up his pants. Alexei roared and lunged at his wife's lover with his fists. A fight ensued, which the woman unsuccessfully tried to break up. Finally, She wrapped both arms around her husband's neck and forced him thus away from his rival. Only now did Lyosha look into his wife's face for the first time. She was sitting crying, with mascara dripping down her cheeks. The remnants of her lipstick were smeared, and Maria looked miserable. When they got in the car, they both didn't know what to say. Lyosha kept wiping his lips smashed by Peter with a napkin. At that second, he wanted only one thing, for Masha to disappear. He was disgusted to be around her. On the contrary, she wanted to burrow into her husband's arms, to tell him how it was, to make him understand her and forgive her. But no one's wish came true that day. Alexei filed for divorce as soon as he could. Maria begged him not to. She sobbed into his phone, promising that everything would change and that this would not happen again. But her husband was as hard as a rock. It was not in his plans to change the decision. The woman had to quit her job. Among her colleagues, rumors about her relationship with her boss, and he himself is extremely persistent, asked Masha to leave, which she did. The changes that suddenly occurred in her life knocked her out of her glue. She only held on as best she could because she had a son whom Maria could not let down. Often after her divorce, she remembered Alexei. Only when they divorced, and he cut off all communication with her, did she understand the phrase her mother liked to repeat, that we do not keep, and we cry when we lose. So that's the story. Share in the comments what you think about this situation and the behavior of the characters.